In the halls of Congress, where decorum usually reigns supreme, something remarkable happened. A congressman stood up and called one of the world's richest men a dick, not behind closed doors, not in a tweet, but right there in a committee hearing. It wasn't just about the word choice. It was about a fundamental question that's shaping American politics. When does civility become complicity? Today, we're breaking down a moment that sparked intense debate about political discourse, wealth inequality, and the transformation of American institutions. We'll hear from Congressman Robert Garcia, who didn't just challenge Elon Musk, he challenged the very rules of engagement in modern politics. At stake, billions in government contracts, massive proposed cuts to essential services, and a battle over who really controls America's future. While some media outlets fixated on Garcia's choice of words, they missed the bigger story: the unprecedented access of private wealth to public power and what that means for everyday Americans. From Medicaid cuts to refugee aid, from disability support to HIV prevention programs, this isn't just about one billionaire's influence. It's about a systematic reshaping of American governance happening right before our eyes. This is Elon Musk 24 Hours, bringing you the stories that matter, beyond the headlines and sound bites. Let's dive right in. The tension in the congressional hearing room was palpable that day. The Oversight Committee, led by Marjorie Taylor Greene, had become ground zero for a clash that would expose the deepening fault lines in American democracy. Congressman Robert Garcia sat there, watching as his colleagues danced around the real issues plaguing the nation. He'd had enough of the polite fiction that everything was business as usual. When I called Elon Musk a dick during that committee hearing, Garcia reveals, leaning forward in his chair, it wasn't just about name-calling. It was about dropping the pretense that we're still operating in normal times. His words hang in the air, heavy with the weight of frustration shared by millions of Americans watching their democracy transform before their eyes. The story of how we got here isn't simple. It's a tale of power, money, and the slow erosion of democratic guardrails that once seemed unshakable. Let's pull back the curtain on what's really happening in Washington and why it matters to every American family struggling to make ends meet. First, consider this shocking reality. While Congress debates cutting vital programs that help millions of Americans, federal contracts worth hundreds of millions are being handed to Elon Musk companies. Just yesterday, a $400 million contract for Tesla emerged. SpaceX continues to secure massive defense contracts. This isn't coincidence. It's a pattern that reveals a disturbing truth about power in modern America. If Joe Biden or Barack Obama had brought in the richest person on the planet and given them unfettered access to federal agencies, Garcia points out, his voice rising with indignation, Republicans would be storming the Capitol again. The double standard is stark, and it's reshaping our government in ways that should concern every American. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. While the media obsesses over decorum and civility, something far more sinister is unfolding. The Republican majority in Congress is pushing for a $4 trillion increase in the debt ceiling, not to fund schools, fix roads, or help struggling families, but to make way for $4.5 trillion in tax cuts that would primarily benefit the ultra-wealthy. Let's break down what this means in real terms. They're proposing to slash funding for Medicaid, gutting healthcare access for millions. They want to cut support for children with disabilities in schools. They're targeting foreign aid that prevents starvation and provides HIV prevention services across the globe. All of this human suffering just to fund tax cuts for billionaires who are already richer than ever. This is the largest redistribution of wealth fiasco we've seen in the modern era of American politics. Garcia explains, his frustration evident. They are literally stealing money from hardworking people and giving it to themselves. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has returned $21 billion to Americans defrauded by banks, is on the chopping block. USAID, which costs less than 0.5% of the federal budget but saves countless lives worldwide, faces devastating cuts. Meanwhile, Musk's wealth has skyrocketed since Trump's presidency began. But there's an even more troubling pattern emerging. As these billionaires accumulate more wealth, they're not just buying yachts and mansions, they're buying power. social media companies, television stations, radio channels. The very means by which Americans receive information are being consolidated under the control of a handful of ultra-wealthy individuals. People tell me I'm overreacting, Garcia shares, his voice tinged with urgency. But we're in a really bad spot, and people need to wake up. If we don't fight really hard, we may never get back the country we've all believed in, lived in, and loved so much. The stakes couldn't be higher. While some members of Congress attend cocktail parties with the very people dismantling our democratic institutions, others are actively working to rewrite history. They're still denying the reality of the 2020 election, still defending the January 6th insurrection, still pretending that stripping resources from the most vulnerable Americans is somehow in the national interest. What's particularly alarming is the response from Republican colleagues behind closed doors. When asked about red lines, points beyond which they won't go in supporting Trump's agenda, the silence is deafening. If you're not willing to stand up and say that an attack and trying to overthrow an election was wrong, Garcia observes, if you're not willing to acknowledge basic facts like Donald Trump's loss and Joe Biden's win, I'm not sure there is a red line. This is where the true crisis of American democracy comes into focus. It's not just about one billionaire's influence or one party's tactics. It's about a fundamental shift in how power operates in America. The wealthy aren't just influencing the system anymore. They're redesigning it to serve their interests exclusively. Consider the mechanics of this power grab. First, slash government agencies and social programs under the guise of fiscal responsibility. Then use those savings to fund massive tax cuts for the wealthy. As public institutions weaken, private power grows stronger. As billionaires get richer, they buy up more means of communication and influence. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that threatens the very foundation of democratic governance. But here's what makes this moment different. The mask has slipped. When Congressman Garcia called out Musk in that hearing, he wasn't just speaking to one billionaire. He was challenging a system that has allowed the wealthy to accumulate unprecedented power over American life. The response from the media was telling. Instead of focusing on the substantive issues, the massive transfer of wealth, the gutting of vital services, the corruption of democratic institutions, they fixated on the question of civility. It's as if the real scandal isn't the pillaging of public resources, but the audacity to call it out in impolite terms. The media treats Donald Trump like a celebrity president, Garcia notes, allowing him to get away with horrific things while policing our language. The bias isn't against conservatives. It's against progressives and Democrats who dare to challenge the status quo. This brings us to the heart of the matter. What does real resistance look like in an era when traditional political norms have been shattered? When one side has abandoned any pretense of working for the common good, is civility still a virtue? Or has it become a weapon used to silence opposition? The evidence is clear. While Democrats are expected to maintain decorum, Republicans barrel through every norm and institution that once constrained political power. Trump's communication style, as problematic as it may be, has proven devastatingly effective at capturing public attention and normalizing the unthinkable. We've got to match that fire with fire, Garcia insists, not by abandoning truth or principles, but by fighting back with the same intensity. The American people want us to bring actual weapons to this bar fight because that's what it is, a fight for the soul of our democracy. The path forward requires a new kind of political courage. It means being willing to call out corruption and abuse of power in clear, unambiguous terms. It means fighting for working-class people, students, seniors, and the vulnerable with the same ferocity that billionaires fight to protect their wealth. This isn't about partisan politics anymore. It's about whether America will remain a democracy where government serves the many, or whether it will complete its transformation into an oligarchy where public power exists solely to enrich the already wealthy. The story playing out in Washington right now is nothing less than an attempt to fundamentally reshape American society. The traditional media's obsession with civility and both sides journalism has created a dangerous asymmetry where one side can openly work to dismantle democratic institutions while the other is criticized for pointing it out too rudely. But here's what gives reason for hope. More and more Americans are waking up to this reality. They're seeing through the pretense of fiscal responsibility and recognizing the massive transfer of wealth for what it is. They're demanding representatives who will fight back, who will name the problem directly, who will stand up for democratic values even when it means breaking with traditional political etiquette. This is why Garcia's confrontational approach resonates with so many people. It's not about the specific word he used to describe Musk. It's about the willingness to confront power directly, to call out the corruption of our political system by name, to fight for the American people with the urgency this moment demands. The truth is, we're at a crossroads in American history. The question isn't whether we'll have conflict. The conflict is already here. The question is whether those defending democracy and the interests of ordinary Americans will fight back with the same determination as those working to undermine them. Every cut to Medicaid, every tax break for billionaires, every contract handed to Musk's companies, every attempt to rewrite history, these aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a coordinated effort to transform America into something fundamentally different from what it has been. A country where government exists not to help those who need it most, but to further enrich those who need it least. The time for polite disagreement has passed. When basic democratic norms are under assault, when public resources are being systematically transferred to the wealthy, when the very mechanisms of democratic governance are being corrupted, civility becomes a luxury we can no longer afford. The real question isn't whether it's polite to call out corruption and abuse of power, it's whether we can afford not to. As we wrap up today's deep dive into the transformation of American democracy, one thing becomes crystal clear. This isn't just about Elon Musk, or even just about billionaires. It's about whether we as a society will allow wealth to dictate the future of our democratic institutions. Congressman Garcia's bold stance reminds us that sometimes speaking truth to power requires dropping the pretense of politeness. While the media may fixate on tone, the real story is about the systematic transfer of public resources to private hands and the courage required to stand against it. These are the stories we're committed to bringing you here at Elon Musk 24 Hours. The deeper context behind the headlines, the real implications for American democracy, and the voices of those fighting to preserve it. If you value this kind of in-depth analysis, hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of informed citizens. Share this video with anyone who cares about the future of American democracy. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on where we draw the line between civility and accountability. Together, we can ensure these crucial conversations reach the audiences they need to reach. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you in the next video.